Thank you so much for coming tonight. This is our 11th annual Hoteling Memorial Lecture. It took us 12 years. To get to our 11th annual lecture because of the COVID situation last year. But it really is wonderful to have us all gathered together in one place and to be able to see everybody's faces and have the interaction of being in the same room together. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. To launch tonight's festivities, I'm going to ask LTU's president, Dr. Verinder Madgo, to come up and say a few words of welcome to you all.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Well, everyone, thank you very much for coming this evening. A little drowsy outside, but there's a lot of excitement right here. So thank you for coming, joining us. It's a tradition. I want to say a few words about College of Arts and Sciences because I haven't had a chance to say like that. Usually, in most institutions, College of Arts and Sciences, they play a service role, which is critical. They provide all the basic courses at the foundation of higher education, and then other people can go to get degree, engineering, architecture, business, and so forth. But this college has evolved tremendously, because now not only does help others to do what they need to do, they have their own degree programs. They're independently, nursing, physician assistant, STEM center, and many other biomedical, they are doing on their own without any relevance to other degrees. They are needed, but they are not simply serving other colleges. I want to compliment the leadership of the college. Many are here. Please clap and acknowledge that. And this tradition that we have, endowed lectures, only this college brings people from everywhere for endowed lecture. We have Sisler lecture, Hartling lecture is another one, which is endowed, and people come. I mean, it's a ritual that they come because of intelligent speakers, the speaker with eminence and history of speaking, and in their own areas, they're the leaders. They are the ones who come here. So Harold Hartling was a very popular, admired professor with students and faculty alike. He was the associate professor of economics in '89, I think he came here. And then he enlarged his activities because of his knowledge and depth in business ethics, business programs, social areas. So he had diversified his talent into the classroom, and a lot of students loved him in the role he played. And he was a very adorable or admired colleague for the faculty. So this lecture series really is a tribute to him. He's dearly missed for who he was and what he contributed to the college and to this university. And it's a family that usually is here. Is anyone from the family here? Usually the family comes here, they are in the audience, and I'm always able to speak with them a little bit. So they know that their family is welcome here and that we are paying tribute to one of them. This lecture that you're going to see is another exceptional lecture, and it is very timely because when you have mind and you have money, there is nothing in between. And you're going to hear about that. Some of you know I have a little urge sometimes to be a little light rather than be tense. So in this area, money and mind, there was a very rich man, elderly, with a lot of wealth and luxury. He suddenly died. His attorney set up a meeting with all the people who felt they'll get inheritance and who will get in his will some big part of his wealth. So they're all sitting like this, the attorney sitting here, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am sorry to disappoint you, because your grandfather bought stocks and put all his money in stocks of manual typewriters. And there is nothing for you left, so I'm sorry you have to leave." Money is an issue that drives this country. Now, if you watch Washington, you know what is happening there, debt ceiling and all. But this lecture will enlighten you on a more intellectual level, and I'm very happy to be part of it in listeners. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Madgo. I should have introduced myself, especially for the students and new guests. I'm Jason Barrett. I'm a history professor, and I'm also the chair of the humanities department. And I was also a colleague of Harold's when I was just starting out assistant professor. I am sorely missing my partner. Professor Corrine Stavish has been doing this with me for the past 12 years and has a quite extensive remembrance and memorial of Harold that she did. I don't have Corrine's performance skills. She's a professional storyteller, but I would like to say that Harold was a much esteemed and much beloved colleague and a great mentor for me as I was starting out as a professor. And I brought one little totem to remember Harold by. In about 2008, 2007, 2008, I took over for Harold as the department's assessment rep. And when I informed him I was taking over his position, he said, "Come down to my office, I have some things for you." Those of us who remember Harold know that his office was organized with banker's boxes stacked on top of banker's boxes, stacked on top of banker's boxes, with papers coming out everywhere. He dug through, handed me a big box, totally worthless papers, just notes from meetings, agendas, crap in the box. But then he reached down at the bottom of the box, and he pulled this out. Those of you who have been to my office know that I keep this pin on my desk. It's a gift from Harold, and it says, "It doesn't have to make sense. It's university policy." And that was Harold's totem to get me on my career as a university administrator. For that, I will always have a place in my heart for Professor Hotelling. He was a wonderful mentor, a wonderful colleague, and we do this every year out of remembrance to him and the family that he was a part of here at Lawrence Tech. And so thank you, Harold. We're thinking about you. This year, since we had a little break last year with COVID, and we came back and we thought, as we head into our second decade of the Hotelling Memorial Lecture, let's see if we can change things up a little bit. And we reached out to our friends in the College of Business and Information Technology, and we asked them if they would join our Hotelling Committee, steering committee, and help us find a speaker and organize the event. So I'd like to extend our heartfelt thank you to Dean Bauman-Mershab and Dr. Pavlo Cibro, who helped us organize tonight's events. They, along with Professor Jeff Powell in the Humanities Department, myself, and Tracy Cash, not in the room at the moment. She's out organizing stuff from the dean's office. Without Tracy, none of this would be possible. She pulls this together every year. So thank you so much. And we are looking forward to this continued collaboration. We certainly see the fruits of it tonight with our speaker that we were able to bring tonight. Sam Husko is the founder of SGH Wealth Management. He's a certified financial accountant. We were particularly interested in him from his work with the, I want to get the name right, the Financial Accountants of Detroit, CFA Society of Detroit, and his work with the Detroit Economic Club, which brought him to our attention and made us think that he was someone that you all really needed to hear from. Professor Hotelling would have loved the substance of this talk because Harold was all about the irrationality of economic theorems and the implausibility of economists' assumption of the perfect rationality among economic actors. And Harold was absolutely fascinated by the edges of economic theory and where it started to break down in fields like psychology. So we're very lucky to have Mr. Husko here to talk to us tonight. Please, Mr. Husko, thank you so much.
Thank you all for having me. I'm excited. Yeah, we are going to be talking about the edges of economics. And so this is going to be an entertaining conversation. You know, I'd say that the gap between theory and practice is maybe no wider than in the financial industry. You know, what textbook tells and what practice is, I can say from my own experience, is quite disparate. So all of us kind of have what I'd consider like a fetish for the complex. You know, we all think that the most complex solution is the best solution, you know, mainly because, you know, it makes us feel this intellectual superiority. But then what it also does is give us blind spots. And so I'll start with a fable. You know, the 1960s, NASA was trying to get us on the moon before the Russians. And, you know, the story says, it's a legend maybe, but the story says that, you know, they couldn't figure out how to write ink pen in anti-gravity. And so, you know, what the United States did is they, you know, put a team on it for a year and spent $1 million to create an anti-gravity pen. And what the Russians did was use a pencil. And so, what I would say is sometimes the best solution isn't the most complex side, and not all complex problems need complex solutions. Now, I have a background in the complex, great introduction, I appreciate that, but what I'm probably most proud of is my work with the CFA Institute. And if those aren't familiar with the CFA, very difficult curriculum. It has about an 18% pass rate, so 82% of people fail the test. Requires about 1,000 hours of study, and truly considered the gold standard of finance. And so what that gives me is A to Z background in the complexities of the stock market. And so where kind of all that founding started is with Benjamin Graham. And so he is the godfather of the foundational side of analytics. And he wrote this book, The Intelligent Investor, back in 1934. And then from that time through 1972, he revised this book 5 separate times. And in those revisions, he not only added new chapters, but he also deleted gigantic sections out of his book in each and every one of those revisions. And why is that interesting? I would say that, the practice of being an analytical investor requires trial and error. Structural change is happening every single day in the stock market. Something that's never happened before is happening every single day in the stock market. And so on the complex side, that means that even the person who founded most of the principles that we use today recognized that he had to stay up with the times and change his algorithms to really be relevant for the new time frame today. And so, it's not a theoretical science, it's a practical science, in my opinion. However, I'm not going to talk about this as much. I just wanted to give some foundation and, really to stand the test of time. What are things that all of us can use that's practical? And so to stand the test of time, we need to have something that's going to speak to those people in 1934 when he, wrote the book as well as today. And so what hasn't changed is human psychology. Human psychology, the way we view money, has been exactly the same from that time frame to today. And what I'd argue is that every one of us views money differently. And it's all a part of our life experiences. Different households, if you grew up poor or rich, you'll have a different view on money. If you grew up in the Great Depression, or if you grew up in the 90s, you're going to have a totally different view on money. And there's a study that showed if you take 2 siblings, the correlation between their income levels is actually more highly correlated than their height or their weight. So you think about it, genetics would say height and weight should be pretty darn close. Their income levels are even closer. And so why do we veer off of the math-based approach? Why are we enticed by these emotions? We're irrational. I mean, quite frankly, we're irrational. The biggest pandemic to hit ever now, and we decide to hoard toilet paper. It's a symbol of safety, right? But these people are the same people trading in the stock market that year. So there is irrationality that's baked into these traders. And in my profession, I see it. People make their investment decisions on the kitchen table based on what might make their spouse happy or what might make their kids happy. It's very rare that it's in the weeds of an Excel spreadsheet. And so I would argue that the daily activity of the markets is actually pretty irrational, and it's a 50-50 chance, historically, statistically, to go up or down. And so with that's one of my main points today, is the long-term portion of investing is the complex analytical side. The short-term portion of investing is the human psychology side. And so the stock market enjoys its air of superiority because it's the biggest, but it's essentially just America's financial garage sale. So every game that's made by man is subject to the vulnerabilities of man as well too. And so it's just a good reminder here. And this is not to rile up any Bitcoin enthusiasts, but honestly, for them to get to 9.2 billion in average daily cash volume is very impressive. However, the New York Stock Exchange has $5.1 trillion sloshing around in it every single day on average. And so, things don't have to make sense as long as they're accepted by the masses. As long as there's enough people around it, that is what the price of these things should be. So collectively, it's efficient, but just don't, look too closely is what I would say. And this will be just some slides of examples of why, a closer look at things. The first of which is somebody paid $10,000 for a Cheeto on eBay that resembled Arnold Schwarzenegger. And so, what I'd say to that is, in real estate, they say, it's only worth how much somebody's willing to pay for it. Well, somebody paid $10,000 for this Cheeto, so it's worth that much in my eyes. The next one is NFTs. That's been a popular subject over the last year. This NFT here sold for $69 million by Beeple. I can still put it here on the screen royalty-free. So they don't own the royalty rights, they just own the HTML code. Also speaking, one red pixel last year sold for $900,000, not even art. And so, there is these examples of irrationality. And, with that, being in the Motor City, I can't not talk about this dynamic, but this is more traditional investing, the religion of Tesla, So Tesla has 1/4 the revenues of GM and Ford. It has 1/3 the profits of GM and Ford. But if you combined General Motors and Ford together in a merger, Tesla's 6 times the market cap of them together. And so, all of these are just fun examples to kind of understand that the actual value of a stock is subjective. If you're a 20-year-old, you're going to view Tesla in a totally different way than if you're an 80-year-old. It's your life experience. Are you comfortable with technology? What's your time horizon? There's so many things involved with that it isn't going to be a perfect science most of the time. And so the price that things should be today is centered in that psychology. And so this is one of my favorite behavioral investors, Daniel Crosby, and he said, the fact that humans are fallible is your greatest advantage as an investor. The fact that you're vulnerable to your own emotions is your greatest weakness. And so, it's easy to say, hey, I'm going to take advantage of those guys that can't control themselves. And then all of a sudden, you turn out to be arrogant and egotistical, and you show those vulnerabilities yourself. So, if you kind of agree with some of the things I'm bringing up, then the name of the game is controlling your own behavior. And so that's where we're just going to kind of explore things. And this is the areas that, famous investors like Ray Dalio take advantage of all the time. He's deep in psychology and deep in history, and he'll get his hands on anything that can give him an edge. So with this, though, I want to explore a little bit further why we're so bad at this. And so, the first thing I'd say is extreme risk scenarios and extreme risk takers are nuanced with luck. And I know that's like rude to say that a successful person was lucky as well too. But a great example of that is Bill Gates. Bill Gates, super intelligent, obviously one of the hardest workers. But did you know his middle school was the first middle school in America to have a computer inside its walls? And so you think about that. He had to be alive at that exact time in history in the exact school in the country to have the first access to a computer ever. I mean, he had a head start over everybody because he's been absorbing that since he was 11 years old. And so, what we have here is the Forbes 400 list. The Forbes 400 list has about 20% turnover per year. So about 80 billionaires who have more money than they could spend in 5 lifetimes fall out of that, not because of death or something else, just because gamblers have a hard time stopping gambling, and so everybody is wanting more and more. And so when we follow these folks, it doesn't help our game. You know, it doesn't help control our behavior. And so the W-2 worker just can't go on the same construct that Jeff Bezos is investing on. And one of the earliest examples of that comes in Jesse Livermore. So he's America's first day trader, so the first Robin Hooder, so to speak. And so, you know, during the Great Depression, Jesse, you know, while everybody else was on the food lines, you know, trying to convert their paychecks into goats just to survive, Jesse became rich beyond his wildest dreams. You know, in one day, well, and I should say he shorted the stock market right before the Great Depression. And so in one day, he made the cash equivalent of $5 billion in one day. And so then, 4 years later, he was bankrupt. So I don't think he took his advice here in the quote, but another example, Rick Guerin, the unknown third member of the Berkshire Hathaway team, who Buffett said, hey, Rick was just as smart as us, but he wanted to get rich a little bit quicker than me and Munger were willing to. And so Rick got over-levered in the 1970s. He got a margin call, which forced him to sell Berkshire Hathaway at $40 a share, now trading at $420,000 a share. So, you know, to stay a billionaire, to stay on your path is a completely different discipline. And it's really, really hard to learn from the biggest risk takers in the world, but we idolize them. And then another thing, too, is the 24-hour investment channels now. And, you know, we're addicted to market forecasts, even though statistics show they're very, very rarely right. And so Philip Tetlock, author of Super Forecast, he wrote a book, and his study showed that the more clout and the more fame that somebody had, the lower probability of success their forecast had. And you might think it's the opposite, but you know, keep in mind, it takes bold, low probability claims to become famous. You can't say boring stuff and expect to get famous. And if people want fame, you know, they're just going to have 30 different forecasts out there, knowing very well that 28 of them will not turn out that way, that they say it will. And then those 2 that hit, they advertise the crap out of it. You know, they tell everybody they know about it to give this air of intellect again. And, you know, as an aside, I've been on CNBC before. The fact that my forecasts are okay just because I'm not famous. So that's the reason why this isn't hypocritical. So, but, you know, they don't have skin in the game. And it's the same with these billionaires, too. They do not have skin in the game. And so what I mean by that is they can make these claims and there's no repercussions at all. And so another research, and a lot of these people on TV are mutual fund managers. Morningstar did a research that showed that less than half of all mutual fund managers even own 1 penny in their own mutual fund. You know, so they're not eating their own cooking. If it's good enough to sell to everybody else, why are less than half of that industry even, you know, participating in their own investments? So, you know, psychology-wise, though, and this is where we start to get into the physiology of things, what these people do is allow us to turn our brains off. We want to just follow somebody else so we don't have to do the heavy lifting ourselves. And so, oops, wrong way. So we get to metabolically, the brain uses up 20% of our caloric activity per day. The average human makes 120 million decisions a year. I mean, that's exhausting just to think about. And so this is where Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman made his stamp. And he created the System 1 and System 2 brain. Okay? And System 1 is your analytical brain that wants to think things through and makes unemotional decisions. And when you use up too much of those calories with System 1, it goes to sleep, and all of a sudden System 2 takes over, and it starts making lazy decisions. And that's the simple concept. If you think this lecture's dry, don't read his book, I'd say. But, you know, he makes some excellent, excellent observations here. And so the lazy way out, that's saying, hey, now you're susceptible to psychology biases. Now you're susceptible to making bad decisions. And one of the studies he had in his research was on Israeli judges. So what you see here is at the dotted line are the food breaks of Israeli judges, okay? So they get in the office in the morning, having that cup of coffee, feeling great about themselves, and are just given innocent verdicts all over the place. Innocent, innocent. And then as time goes on, they start getting hangry and cranky, and then it's just guilty, 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 and then lunch break happens, and all of a sudden, they're back to super nice again. And I'll tell you, this is data. Data can lie, but data doesn't lie most of the time. And with that, I would say, if you ask any of these intellects, these are very smart individuals, and you say, hey, you getting a little testy right before lunch break, they're not going to admit to that. They're going to create some hindsight bias story to it to say, no, it's something else, or they're not going to just own the fact that this is something real that's happening. And then, once we start delving more into investments as well too, this is what really hurts us as investors too. You lose 13% of your IQ under pressure. And so when you need it the most, when you're investing in a bear market and everybody's panicking, that's when you're least intelligent. And so another example of that, professional golfers, when putting from the same distance, par versus birdie, historically, statistically, make more par putts. It's the exact same putt. But when they're under that pressure, the statistics just show the pressure makes them less effective. And so that's when we get the biases. And so first, there's a ton of biases. I'm only going to cover about 3 today. But that's where, when the lazy brain takes over, we can start to see some issues in our decision making. And so what you see here, this is the Solomon-Asch line test. And so what Solomon did here is he got people in a room and said, hey, this line, it's very simple. Which line is the same length, A, B, or C? And then they would bring somebody in who was fake, and that person would just come in and say, no question, C, and then just walk out super confidently. And then everybody else in the room would be like, what's that guy know that I don't know? And then start creeping doubt that it's obviously B. And they were able to induce wrong answers out of people 76% of the time. 76% of the time. So, it allows us to turn our brain off to follow somebody else. It also is a part of the herd mentality to say, hey, I'd rather be a part of the majority that's wrong than the minority that's right. And so that's where we start to see some ties to evolution. The recent Netflix Squid Game said, when faced with danger, seek refuge in the herd. So humans are weak individually, but we're the strongest animals when we're a collective. And that has just been ingrained in our bodies for time and time again. And I can relate to this. This will be quick, but I would not recommend walking through the streets of Thailand with a bag of peanuts in your pocket. I am not as strong as a monkey, but that said, together, somehow we can make whole species go extinct. And so that's what feeds us into this herd mentality to just want to do what the group does. The second one is the action bias. And we feel this all the time in our field. Please do something, anything. Just do anything. Even if it's wrong, I just want something to happen. And so that's where the example comes with soccer goalies. So soccer goalies, 94% of the time, dive either left or right. They could just stay center, but statistically, they dive left or right 94% of the time. So statistically, if they did nothing and just stood still, they would block more penalty shots statistically than doing this great show of effort. But you think about the Brazilian goalie in the World Cup, if he just stood still and did nothing and let the goals go in, he's going to hear it from everybody. And so he has to show this effort even though it doesn't lead to the best results. And so that in the markets is what I would consider unnecessary trading activity. hey, just do something, trade anything just to get things going. And we're heading into this season now of unnecessary trading activity. You guys might not be aware, but the biggest trading volume of mutual funds comes in November and December. And why? Is it a great time to trade? Not really. Why is because all the mutual fund managers know that their calendar year returns are about to be printed on all their propaganda in January. And only 15% of mutual fund managers outperform their index. So they're getting their excuses ready. They're getting things to say, hey, we're fighting against the problem. I know we didn't do great in 2021, but here's all this activity. We're getting the ship right, all these things. And so that's what they're really doing, and it's not really going to help performance. It's a human behavioral trait and not an analytical trait. And so, but we all want it. We want to feel comfortable regardless if it's helpful. And so another example of that is Fidelity. Fidelity did a study of which account holders in its millions of accounts perform the best. And any guesses? Which account holders, types of people? Yes, sir. Ones who forgot they had an account. So they tracked it by how many times they logged into their online access, found people that didn't even realize they had an account, which can happen sometimes in inheritances and things like that. And those were their best performing accounts. And so it's folks that didn't keep touching the bar of soap until it had dissolved that actually outperformed everybody else that thought they were doing good things. And so now keep in mind, and you'll see later, I'm not talking about passive investing today. So there's things you can do. However, the impulse is to do too much. The impulse is always to do too much. So I'm not here saying do nothing. I'm saying do a little bit less than you think you should. That's what I would say within that. The other, or the last bias, I believe, is ego, overconfidence. And so there was a study done that self-selected day traders, and the self-selection was only come into this survey if you know you outperformed the stock market last year. And top one's interesting. 25% of those people underperform the markets by 15%. I mean, that's not even in the ballpark. I worry if they know how to use a calculator. But the thing is they don't audit their own performance. They just have this self-confidence that says, I beat it. And then they don't even check and underperformed by 15%. And so, there's no market timers in the Forbes 400 for, again, any Robin Hooders out here. So it is not a recipe for the long term. And then for half of the room, maybe, the Journal of Public Library of Science found that 72% of men thought they're more smarter than average. So now that might say you want to hire a female financial advisor. That might be a smart thing to do. And, apologies to present company. But another survey by UC Berkeley said that 94% of college professors think they do above average work compared to their peers. Statistically, that's impossible. So, but yeah, I apologize for having to point that out. But what with ego, one bad trade can erode 10 phenomenal trades before that point. And so that's where you get pumped up, you go in the wrong direction. And just ask Jesse Livermore or Huang at Archegos, and you don't have to look that far to understand what I'm saying. So I laid the groundwork. No one has a crystal ball. The first step in all of this is to be aware of your own vulnerabilities and to try to maintain them. But short-term opportunities do exist. They're infrequent, they're painful, they don't feel right, but they do exist. And so I'm going to start by fighting the ego bias with probably one of the most misunderstood quotes in finance. So he said, Peter Lynch, invest in what you know. And I think most people in the 90s misinterpreted it to think, hey, if my son or daughter is buying Abercrombie and Fitch clothes, invest in what I know. It's around me, and I'll buy it while they're buying it, and if they stop purchasing it, I'll get out of it. It's been since to be told that, Peter Lynch was talking about fundamentals, not your familiarity with a company. And, your children's enthusiasm for Abercrombie and Fitch is not going to help them out of a financial pickle. And so, the other one we see a lot is people investing in their own company stock. I think the ego there is that their work at the company is what's keeping General Motors afloat, so they feel more comfortable investing in something they know. But, really what this means is over-scrutinize all of your beliefs. And one awful one now today, it is what it is, but it's politics. Politics creates so many blind spots for people that it's very, very difficult for them to overcome. But the CFA Institute did a study, and it showed that highly diverse investment teams outperform homogeneous groups by 5 to 5.8% per year. So, why? Because a group of people that come from all different areas have less blind spots. And it's as simple as that. So I would flip this on its head for its misunderstood quote. I'd flip it on its head and say, buy what you don't know. When Al Gore invented the internet, nobody guessed that social media would be the biggest industry that came out of it. Nobody. There was tons of different ideas that came out of it, but not social media. And so you have to get out of your comfort zone. That's the only way you're going to get into investments that are really going to have that consistency. And I'm sure most people know the gentleman on this side, your left. Does anybody know the person on the right? I think I heard it. Yep. Well, I think you'll know him more. That person is Jim Simons, and probably not that well known, but since the 1980s, Buffett's been crushing it. He's got an average return of 23%. Jim Simons has done 66% per year since the 1980s. I mean, tripling, and by far showing that Buffett's not the best investor in the world. And so Buffett, though, has a net worth of $90 billion. Simons is only 21. Why? Because Buffett's been doing this thing for 70 years. Do you know anybody who's had a career for 70? He just won't stop. And so Buffett's not the most famous investor because he's the best. He's the most consistent. He has the most consistency year in, year out, and he's taken advantage of the long term more than anybody else. If Simons could duplicate that return but have a 70-year career, he'd be a 4 quadrillionaire. So, to put that into context. But again, another Peter Lynch study, and this is to fight the action bias. If you invested since the 1930s on the best day of the market versus the worst day on the market, so the absolute best market timing you could ask for on an annual basis versus the absolute worst, and you got the long-term returns on that, it'd be the difference of 11% versus 11.7%. Less than 1% difference is accounted for that market timing type of condition. And so again, it's a testament to say there are moments, they don't happen often, so do a little bit less than what you think you might have to. And then to really start investing like some of these people that I've mentioned today, you have to create a margin of safety. So this is Seth Klarman's book. It's out of print. Copies of it go for like $2,000 on eBay. But bottom line is the simple concept is you need to get your base case scenario something that you can truly be happy with. So you need an engine of your assets to just create the outcome to a high potential degree that you'll be happy with. If you can do the savings and the hard work to just say, all right, this chunk of my money will lead me to a relatively good goal, then think about the power that it gives you with all the extra money that you save. You will be a cold, heartless trader that could take advantage of a lot more because you're not going to be suffering from all those biases. In the market downturn, if it feels like it's going to evaporate all your assets, it's very hard to turn things on its head and say get more aggressive at that time. And so, what we would see is that allows you to take the big risk. That's what allows you to get into things like Bitcoin and private equity and IPOs and things like that, where one investment can really bring your top end much, much higher. But I would argue until you get to that point, you're going to be suffering from so many psychological biases that it's going to be very difficult to get through. And so the other thing is that it makes you no longer relying on forecasts. You don't have to worry about what's going to happen over the next 3 months because you have your base scenario intact. And Buffett lives to that. He's in the same home that he purchased when he was in his 40s. So, it's about controlling your ego and creating that margin of safety. Another great person in this space, Nassim Taleb, said, you can be both risk-loving and completely against ruin. And that's where I'd say it really personifies this the most. Now, what about those infrequent opportunities that pop up only once every 3 to 5 years? Every bear market has recovered. Every single bear market has recovered. And when you talk about good expectations for stocks, you usually have to get 15 to 20 years out to have a plus 90% percentile to make money in the stock market. But when these moments happen in the complex size, when it's about 2 to 3 standard deviations from the mean, that's where that 15 to 20-year time horizon comes down to 2 or 3 years. So, it's not going to feel like it's a great opportunity, but all of a sudden, all the statistics become way shorter term in the market. And so the great investor, I would argue, is just someone who can do an average thing in a moment when everybody else is panicking. And I'd say anybody who tries to do this in their own life, do it in tranches, put some guardrails in place, but there's opportunity in that as long as you can do an average thing in that really high pressure moment. And how do you kind of get to that point? I would recommend what's kind of considered a pre-mortem. So not a post-mortem, it's too late at that point. What I'd say is figure out every possibility that could go wrong, even possibilities that could go right, and try to pre-plan every decision that you can so that you can say, hey, today I'm sober, I'm not emotional today. How would I react if XYZ stock was here or XYZ stock was there? Another practice a lot of people do is just create a list of companies that they really like today, but it's just too overvalued in their mind. Well, when that bear market happens, that's your list to kind of get started. And I would, again, echo time horizon is very important. Doing it gradually, not all together, is very important. But another interesting study is University of Chicago studied bilingual people. And when bilingual people think in their weaker language, they were better investors. They had higher returns when they were forced to think about the whole financial analysis process in their weaker language. And I think that gets back to Kahneman. That gets back to slowing your brain down. It's easy to think super fast in the language that you're most comfortable with, but you're forced to kind of slow down and also maybe get a little emotionless too. Now, it's not fun. Being a contrarian means you are guaranteed to feel pain. You are not going to catch the bottom, and you're going to be second guessing yourself for a long time. These are all the opposite people from that Solomon Asch line test that I was bringing up before. But, the disregarded need to be looked in further. The founder of WhatsApp, he applied for a software engineering position at Facebook, got declined, his resume wasn't good enough, turned around and sold that back to Facebook for $19 billion. Netflix, founders of Netflix got laughed out of a conference room by the Blockbuster executives for trying to sell for $50 million. And nobody wants to get laughed out of a conference room. Nobody's going to put themselves in that position. So being that contrarian is not easy. So when you're doing these things, you've got to have again, pre-planned robotic decisions in place. Otherwise, you know you're going to second guess yourself. You know things are going to go down further after you pull that trigger. And so you have to be prepared for what you're really entering into. But what I would argue, and this is part of the psychology, is when the statistics become so far in your favor like this, simply it's becoming a less crowded trade. Again, simply the probability of success has gone up for a much shorter time frame. And this is probably the most common thing that we hear is always, this time is different. And I would actually agree that every time is different. And so this was a famous quote by Templeton. He said these were the 4 most dangerous words of investing. And so with that, though, things that have never happened before are happening every day. That's a Scott Sagan quote. And so with that, I would just say that massive structural change in the markets means that no 2 markets are exactly the same. So using this as an excuse is just going to keep you on the sidelines. Every time is different. And an example of that is, I was quoted in USA Today on the GameStop and AMC meme stock phenomena. And what you see here is, this is a Forbes cover from April 1998. A bunch of kids are tormenting Wall Street, making their own NASDAQ markets. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. There's things we can learn from here to apply today. This time is different, yes, but there's, again, reasons to not get over fearful in these type of situations. Then we've got all the other biases. So, that's just showing today. This Schwab report actually only came out 2 days ago, and it's showing that people are starting to admit, I think, that biases are on the rise. And so it also breaks it down by generation too, which can kind of be interesting. But this is a concept that people are getting more and more comfortable with, and so something that we have to know as an investor. Now, again, being the most successful investor takes psychology, history, analytics, anything you can get your hands on to have an edge. But building wealth and being good with money only takes, again, consistency over time. However, if you have all that other stuff, the analytics, all the other things, but don't have psychology, you're still going to be a horrible investor. And so if you can't confront the psychology part first, that's going to get in your way of everything else. And so what I would suggest is automate, pre-plan, meditate, and really just try to control your own situation. Figure out what your plan is, create your own margin of safety, and just don't follow your notion of intellectual superiority. And closing on Benjamin Graham again, investing isn't all about competing with others. It's about controlling yourself at your own game. So thank you very much, everyone.
We do have some time for questions and answers. Talking to Tracy this morning, though, we were a little skittish about passing the microphone around and letting everybody cough into the microphone in turn. So what we did instead, you are welcome to just raise your hand and speak loudly. If you would like a microphone, we'll have this one turned on and you're welcome to come on. Please just stand a foot or 2 away from it.
I'll repeat the question.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Sir?
Matt.
Thank you. Matthew Cole here. I'm a member of the College of Business and also psychologist. So
Nice.
can you go back 2 slides?
2 slides.
Yeah.
Yes.
That to me is a home run slide right here. So which column is the largest for the bias?
Recency bias. What happened yesterday is going to repeat itself today.
And right. So between that and to me also I think, and this is where I'm going to thank my colleague Dr. Severo, finance from College of Business, is the loss aversion bias.
Yes. Loss aversion bias is here. And, funny enough, let's see here, I was looking at this earlier, 63% in the silent generation, but it's actually millennials that are most affected by the loss aversion.
So loss aversion is an interesting
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, this is I think a common bias that impacts investing, and Pablo helped me a lot with that. So for example, I invested in an option, and I made a gain, and Pablo's like, well, hurry up and sell it. And I'm like, yeah, but so what? I only made like a 20% gain. And then the next day it dropped. And I had a 20% loss. And the pain of that 20% loss was so much more than the fact that I could have sold it and had a 20% gain. I just think that's a really interesting psychological bias.
Absolutely.
Probably huge for people.
Yep.
Because if you invest in the indexes, usually they're just always going to go up. But that little bit of incremental gain, you're like, it's not so much. But then you see it drop so much, like, oh my God, I just lost all of it. And it's like, no, you didn't necessarily lose that because it was always gaining a little bit. You just are experiencing a loss aversion.
Sure, sure. Well, and you feel that in bear markets all the time. I mean, again, that's tied to the action bias as well, too. I would rather lock in this 30% loss than have to wake up tomorrow morning and see my account down another 3%, even if it's going to shoot me in my own foot over the next 3 years. And so, yeah, that's one of the more popular covered ones. But yeah, definitely super, super fascinating. Yes, sir.
So even if an average person who's not a financial professional, right, would follow your advice, I mean, in the long term, they're probably going to make 6, 7, 8%.
Okay.
But don't you think the slimy underbelly of Wall Street, there's so much insider trading and all kinds of crooked things going on. I mean, nobody's ever going to come ahead in this game. You know, it's just the whole thing is set up.
Yeah.
Make sure that a very small percentage of people with their inside information are making billions and billions, and people like me, you know, who have limited knowledge of finances,
Mhm.
are putting money in, you know, like you said, thinking somewhat scientifically and trying to put in safe mutual fund type of situations, index funds, whatever.
Mhm.
So it seems to me that the whole game is rigged, right? And people like I don't know any names, but you know, they're making billions of dollars by insider trading. I mean, how does that all jive?
Yeah, and I think it gets into the beginning part in that, you know, it's a part of, you know, the volume of the markets is what I feel like makes it efficient still. I would deflect that a little bit and say recently politicians have been the most insider traders, which I don't know why that law has not changed yet. I would love to beat that drum if I could, but, you know, Fed Reserve chairs are trading ahead of the markets.
Pandemic too.
Yeah, senators did huge trades. There's no reason they shouldn't be under the same scrutiny as the investment industry. You know, investment industry is always going to go through those ups and downs. I didn't talk into it as much, but I think a lot of people don't realize how much just simply the Excel spreadsheet has just changed finance altogether. Because, you know, that I would say had a big part to play in the 2008 crash that people don't give it credit for. Because, you know, before that point, analysts were doing everything on paper. So you can only analyze so many stocks with pen and pad. However, Excel spreadsheets turn that from a very small amount to thousands of stocks in one keystroke. And then the regulators just weren't able to keep up with them after that point. And so we're still actually, I'd say, recovering from that a little bit from the Excel spreadsheet, which might not seem intuitive. But certainly there's going to be bad players in every market. I would just say that, you know, overall, if you don't want to get active, passive is by far the best way to go. And passive will get you what you expect, but you have to have those long-term time horizons. I just am playing in the middle ground, I would believe. I think the day traders are, you know, where the insider trading and that stuff can kind of go, and there is dirt within that. But there are these moments that just are available for opportunity that we can take advantage of. But it's way harder than I think we realize unless we're in the zone. Yeah.
A related question. I can't tell from this presentation if smart investing is look at the company, what debt it has, what products are coming out, what markets are open to it, or play all the other suckers in the market and know that they're emotional.
Yep.
And so keep your emotional centeredness.
Yep.
So that you can take advantage of other people's irrationality.
Yep.
That seems to be the message, but you're still not telling me, look at how much debt the company's carrying, see what products, what their supply chains are. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I thought a talk on that might be not as entertaining for everybody. But that is super important. I think that, again, in the beginning, I believe the long-term market. So if you believe in mean reversion, the only way to understand if you're above, below, statistically within the mean is with analysis. And so, yeah, you have to know all that type of stuff. Now, if you do passive investing, then I don't think you have to know that type of stuff. So, this is more applicable to all of us, this side of things, but absolutely. In getting into the first thing I said, it's just that I think those that don't trade like daily don't realize how much trial and error is involved in investing. We want to think that the person that's in charge of that stuff is going to be right 100% of the time, but it's about doing volume, testing that volume to see where the flows are headed, and then adjusting your algorithms to continually meet things. Because again, that's getting back to the Excel spreadsheet. I would be fascinated to find out what Benjamin Graham would write today. Again, I mentioned he rewrote his book 5 times because the market's changed. How would he would probably have to rewrite his book every day now to keep up with it at this point. So anything I talk to about that will get old. This will stand the test of time. And so that's why I was focusing on this today. So, yep.
Even though it has never happened in the U.S. history, but is there ever possibility that will default on our own?
Well, I mean, they're toying with that now.
Parties are now neck and neck on each other.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all hope not. The headline of U.S. defaults on its debt would be very damaging. And, we do get a lot of benefits from the U.S. dollar being the strongest currency in the world. So that would damage that. The largest holder of this debt that you speak of is the Social Security system. So, I mean, you got to think, they're going to be cutting their own feet, to whatever the saying, to spite their face or whatever. But they're going to be hurting themselves in a compounded way. I'm hoping, because it happens every time now, I'm hoping that it's just a negotiation piece. But, certainly it's a scary thing to kind of watch.
It's come to a limit this time. I think it's almost hypocrisy. I mean, one party does one thing and then they oppose on the same issue the other party.
So this time is different?
Yeah. So, those who are in the upper age and put all their money in 401k.
Yep.
If they default, they're dead.
Yeah. But I think that, again, that is our own personal fears getting involved as well, too. And so I do believe there will still be a path for things. But yeah, I mean, certainly the short term is certainly dicey to that degree. So.
History says it won't happen.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, there's always the first time.
But now, because of that, the growth trade is less crowded. So those folks that can kind of view things a little different and are comfortable with being wrong for a period of 6 months can take advantage of the fact. And you talk about the insider trading. This isn't even insider trading. This is just saying that the people that can have it as a more analytical viewpoint say, we saw that. I pre-planned this, so I know how it was going to happen from the last time, and this is how I'm going to react next time around. That's, in my opinion, how you can control your own side of things and take advantage of other people's vulnerabilities instead. So that's what I'd argue, at least. So, yep. Yep. Okay. And so that would be passive investing. I've done a lot of talks for the S&P 500 indices, and you know, I would argue that the S&P 500 is an active strategy. That's my argument, is that it benefits growth stocks, and it has the highest percentage. Mm-hmm. But who wrote the algorithm?
And the algorithms are drawing on numbers that are driven by irrationality, right? And they're recording numbers, and those numbers are based.
But I'd still say some man, woman wrote that algorithm. And so it's still going to be vulnerable. But if somebody has opinions on what stocks are undervalued or overvalued while they're writing that algorithm, the S&P 500 is a growth proposition. You know, like, it puts more money in the biggest companies. So you're generally going to have a growth tilt with the S&P 500. So I think we're talking about two things. Like, if you use passive algorithm investing and commit to it long term, yes. The long-term commitment in a passive approach will completely remove you from the psychological issues of investing. But you'll still feel it, you know, but as long as you can ignore it, then yeah, you will avoid all of those issues with the passive side. But I would just say, you know, the algorithm side of things, those are just tools nowadays. I don't commonly see somebody have 100% of their wealth just in the S&P 500 index. And that's where I would say some of the psychological aspects start to creep in with people's investments. Yeah? Yes, sir.
In line with what Mazin was saying, my observation is about, we human beings, we are processors with a limited capacity, typically.
Okay.
Very limited capacity. While machines, like algorithms, they don't. Right? Even if you write something that takes into consideration like 2,000 factors, right? Including the psychology of people that are investing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Can calculate certain thresholds and stuff. But you can put together analytical and technical analysis and decide what thresholds you will act upon. Maybe if you do that with 2,000 stocks, then you can have a certain gain, the majority of them, and limit your damage. So my question is, I'm really surprised by the level of randomness daily-based market has, even if we have incredible capacities in creating algorithms, just learn themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Algorithms nowadays are not something that we just write. They act themselves. We don't know what they are thinking. There are many demonstrations of that in chess games, in
Mm-hmm.
Go games,
Right.
in very hyper-complex systems.
Sure.
I'm very surprised, like in line with what Mazin said, that nothing very completely helpful was developed in the last 5 years.
And you know, I'd say like to piggyback on that, I'd say the invention of these algorithms and how fast they are nowadays really just speeds up the fact that this is a copycat league. And what I mean by that is when somebody figures out something that works, it's almost immediately copied by everybody else. And then the value of that algorithm completely goes back to nothing. And so that's why I'm trying to say it's more trial and error than I think that you would realize in the weeds of it all. Because again, Fama French, that was the 3-factor model that was beating the markets for like 30, 40 years. And it was just the simple ideas that smaller stocks do better than bigger stocks, high quality companies based on balance sheets do better than lower company quality stocks, et cetera. There are no premiums for Fama French today. These guys are still super famous and great professors, and it worked for a period of about 15, 20 years. but it does not add any value to portfolios today. It's just completely gotten dissipated. So when people find out about something, everybody takes advantage of it. All the big institutional funds take advantage of it. And then you get back to where you're at, which is just passive investing again. But again, the thing that doesn't change is when those big downturns happen, how everybody reacts to those big downturns. And that's what I think I'm trying to argue in this. When the markets are good, it's hard to outperform the markets. It's very, very difficult to outperform the markets. 85% of mutual funds underperform their index, 85%. So only 15%. Out of that 15% year over year, only about, I think it's 7% are the same ones that perform the next year. So like you pick what did good last year, it's got a 93% chance of doing better the following year. So absolutely, it's not something that you can sit on if you're trying to outperform in an up market. But I think what everybody's overlooking when they're trying to get into the theory and the analytics and the overly complex side of the market is these easy opportunities to make money. And those easy opportunities mean feeling a lot of pain as well too. So, sir?
Yeah, I was just wondering your reaction to good old-fashioned, old-school dollar cost averaging. Does it not psychology?
Yeah, I mean that passive, there's all these tools that just fight against you making any emotional decisions. Anything that you can, like that Fidelity study I mentioned, people that don't look at their accounts do better. They're best at Fidelity. And so, if you're not going to, pour your life into research and to trading and to all that other stuff, use all these other tricks you can to just cause yourself to have an arm's reach from your investing. I work for CFOs of companies. Like, they could do what I do. Why do they hire me? Because they know they have emotions tied to their investments that they're subject to as well too. So they want that emotional arm reach from their investments so I can be more cold and calculated with things. I have emotions. If I put all my money in the markets and it went down, it's going to make me feel a certain way as well too. So any tricks you can for your own personal standpoint to just kind of keep that emotional arm's length is really the tricks that everybody needs to employ. So. Yes, sir.
So I guess I have a two-part question. Do you agree that Generation Z, my generation, relies more on technology and social media than the later generations like Generation X and baby boomers? In terms of everyday life, that we're on it more and it's more a part of our day, I should say.
Sure. Yeah, I mean.
Now, I guess then okay, I guess.
No, good. What's the second part? Did you?
Okay. With that being said, do you anticipate a change in market behavior, thus starting to go into the workforce, knowing that we rely so much on social media influence?
So this is not a jab, but like all of us, now that we have cell phones and we're used to like instant gratification, we all have shorter attention spans. We all have shorter patience. And what I've noticed over the last 10 years is bear markets have been a little bit more steep, but the recoveries have been much shorter. So our attention span has made the recovery of the stock market much shorter than it used to be in, say, the 80s and 90s. And I would tie that to generational shifts, but I'd also more so tie that to the cell phone more than anything because, all generations are on cell phones, and that's affecting all of us in how we view the world. One interesting thing, though, he's a medical doctor. His name's William Bernstein, and he created the 4 pillars of a bubble. And one of the most interesting things I find from his research is it takes a generational shift. So an entire generation to not have a personal experience with a big major bear market before the next bubble can occur. So like everybody who felt that bubble in their generation, they're like, I'm not doing that again. But human nature, as time passes, 20, 30, 40 years pass, the attitude is more like, you guys just don't understand this. And that's where we get into things like Bitcoin or NFTs or the other stuff that I mentioned. A lot of the pushback isn't based in analytics and theory. There's not much to analyze with Bitcoin. It's more just like, oh, your generation doesn't understand this because my generation's in technology. But in reality, it's probably that generation hasn't experienced a bear market that they lost significant money in yet. It doesn't mean anything until you've seen your accounts go down 40%. And so it just changes the way that you view money altogether. Like I've worked for Depression era babies. There's unfortunately not many left anymore, but you can't get them in stocks. They will not touch a stock. They are only talking about CDs. This is something that happened in the 1930s that's still causing their decision making today. And so, I just find that to be fascinating, that it really does. For all these bubbles to occur, we're always going to have another bubble the next time a new generation comes into the investing world significantly, where they haven't experienced that bear market yet. But the observation would be shorter recoveries is something we've 100% noticed once this new generation's gotten in. Good question.
Great questions and conversation. Thank you so much. If you will join me in thanking, let's do it.
Maybe.
We have a small gift in our appreciation. Thank you so much for attending tonight. We do have coffee and desserts and stuff out in the lobby afterwards. If you want to hang around and talk to Mr. Husko, I'm sure he'd be glad to converse with you. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.